In the last Faith video, we explored all things Chapter 1, all of its endings, all of its characters, and what they all mean. Today, however, we're going to take a look at the first half of Chapter 2 and discuss the mysteries of Gallup Cemetary and the Snake Meadow Hill Church. But first, let's get into the prologue. As mentioned in the previous video regarding Michael and Father Garcia of Chapter 1, the prologue of Chapter 2 sees us control Father Garcia as he tries to exorcise the demon within Michael. However, as we know, it fails and he escapes into the woods of Chapter 1, where we see him trying to attack John multiple times, until his demise in the true ending of Chapter 1. After that sequence, we get a screen that appears with "It's 2 AM", which may hold some real significance to understanding Chapter 2 as a whole. The reason for this is that unlike in Chapter 1, where we saw John travel in a car to his destination, which is the Martin family residence, this time the screen just appears and we see John surrounded by a circle of rocks as we make our way to Gallup Cemetery. We then enter the save room and are greeted by 3 people, all who have seemingly been used by the cult to conjure more demons. As more notes tell us, there are promises the cult made to help one of them bring their grandfather back from the dead, which was never their original intention. Another, a promise of power after dealing with an abusive father, and a woman who lost her baby due to the cult and was led into the woods to meet Gary. As John approaches the mirror to the far end, we see a cutscene of John holding a key with an extremely pleasing smile on his face. This, I believe, is the start of what appears to be John's battle with himself, and a reflection of the state of his mind in this chapter. Now, after purifying those 3 souls with our trusty cross, we see a gate without a fence. So naturally, that key we saw John have in his hand would surely fit that lock, right? Well, yes, as we know, but you have to do something first. And John going back to the mirror, in our reflection, we see John stab himself in the eye with that key, symbolising that making the relevant sacrifice, in this case his eye, can help him see the truth, which in this instance is through the locked gate and a new area of the cemetery. A little further up, and 1 tree demon later, we reach a church that looks a little worse for wear. Now, the notes for both the Faith Chapter 2 demo and the full chapter help us explore just exactly what happened here, and honestly it's quite fascinating. This church, or sanctuary as the notes seem to call it, seemed to be housing for many children who are part of the church and the attached orphanage, at least in the beginning anyway. Most of the notes in the demo are written from an unnamed man or woman who worked at the church. Judging by the notes, I would guess they were like another nun or a volunteer, but again it's not specified. But this person had 6 children in their care, all of which strayed off into the corn maze and died, seemingly ripped apart by something. She also mentioned that a girl stayed in the house last night. Now, we don't know when last night is, however my initial thoughts were that it was Amy Martin, because as we know she seemingly survived the events of Chapter 1 as we see her again in Chapter 2. But now thinking more carefully, the dates just don't add up. Amy Martin was 17 during the events of Chapter 1, yet one of the notes found in the full Chapter 2 game state the following. On our way in, we asked some of the locals about the church. It was mostly the stories we had heard before, evil spirits dragging children into the cornfield and secret tunnels under the chapel, but there was this spindly lady game that we hadn't heard yet. Apparently it has something to do with summoning the spirit of a woman who used to take care of orphans back in the 50s. There was even an old rhyme they told us. Walk the church from room to room, and maybe you will see her. She will move when you do, but never try to trick her. Now you might just think that it's referring to the specific spindly lady demon that you see in the church. Well, maybe it could, however that would mean that we would have to accept that whoever this demon was, or spirit of a woman, had their own backstory that related to this church that we aren't told about, or that we aren't privy to. If it had something to do with a woman who took care of orphans back in the 50s, then surely this quote relates to Sister Bell, even though the rhyme itself does not, as we don't see Sister Bell until the end of the game. Also, according to the Faith Wiki, the design of the Spindly Lady Demon was selected as the winner of a character design contest announced before the full version of Faith Chapter 2. So what that's trying to tell us is that the rhyme itself was added in later into the game, but the original quote about a spirit of a woman who used to take care of orphans back in the 50s likely related to Sister Bell. Now, not too long after those 6 children died in the corn maze in the note writer's stead, the church then sent a new volunteer to help look after 6 new children in the sanctuary, Sister Bell. Seemingly normal in the beginning and spending all her time with the new children, dancing with them, talking to them as they surround her, but she is noted as being a little off, staring into the sky as if talking with someone. Cut to note 5 that is seemingly written by a detective who is sent to investigate Snake Meadow Hill Church along with Father Clark, who apparently runs the place. After 4 of those 6 new children have gone missing, there is one missing woman. I can only presume that that is the one who wrote those notes, and of course one deceased nun who we can only guess is Miriam Bell. It's not explained what happened during that time between Sister Bell arriving and the kids going missing, but you could hazard a guess or two. However, 2 kids are left in the sanctuary. Twins. Now, if you've been following Faith, this is key, as those twins must be Amy Martin's 2 twin brothers, Nate and Jason. Note 6 talks of the twins seeing Miriam Bell, though no one else can seem to see her, almost like an apparition. Whilst Note 7 tells us how Miriam was seen dragging the twins down into the basement, despite she apparently being dead. Presumably she took them down there to perform a ritual on them, if the last note in the demo is anything to go by. Written by Sister Bell herself, it reads,
"Here is the ritual of the door to hell. Let no brother or sister utter it. He that is master of spirits, let 3 spirits that follow the dragon be put into the effigy of the accursed. Only then can it be purified. You will know it is time when its eyes glow red. To enter the unseen world, destroy the purified effigy with fire. Then shall the door to hell be opened."
In the full game, once you enter the basement, there is a final memoir from Father Clark, who clearly went down into the basement to try and save the twins from Sister Bell. And you can guess how that ended, as the note is called Final Memoirs. There's one thing in this note that I can't get out of my head though. "I now descend the staircase knowing full well that she awaits for me ahead. Checking my old watch has revealed something quite astonishing. Time doesn't change down here as we know it on the surface. Even now, the hands don't move past 2 o'clock. God's work be done. I have been to where only the faintest lights shine and protect from things unspeakable." Unspeakable referring to the unspeakable demon that the cult are trying to summon, but it's the reference about time that most fascinates me. Time doesn't change down here like it does on the surface. Even now the hands don't move past 2 o'clock. And what's the first thing that we saw after the prologue with Father Garcia? It's 2 AM. This might be trying to tell us that perhaps the cult, using the satanic rituals and demons with unspeakable powers, can maybe manipulate reality, maybe even time, in regards to what John actually thinks is real and not real. So perhaps what John is seeing in this chapter is only what the cult wants him to see. However, we will go into further detail about that in the next video. These demo notes give us so much information and background on the connections of chapter 1 and 2, and most notably with what happened to the Martin kids after Amy's failed exorcism on September 21st, 1986. Or at least, that's what it seems like, because as previously mentioned, the dates don't add up. So what this game tends to do quite well, what the Face series it says does quite well, is that it gives you information about different characters and events, but in the context of something that may or may not be happening, that may not be real, if that makes any sense. There is also a note in the graveyard that confirms the Martins' parents' death on that fateful night too. The cult took the twins, perhaps even before that night, and kept them at this sanctuary under the careful eye of a demon posing as a nun from the church, Miriam Bell. At least that's what it seems like on the surface. As we go further into this, I'm of the opinion that that is not necessarily how it is. For now, let's get back to John and notes from the full chapters game, and the first slot we find when we explore the sanctuary, which are from a group of ghost hunters who are trying to get a scoop after hearing about what happened, presumably back in the 1950s, which is when we think that Miriam Bell was originally there. As expected though, it doesn't end well for these guys either, with one of them getting stuck in the basement and another one going missing. The most interesting part of this exploration of the sanctuary is that if you go into the confessional booth, John then starts discussing his sins and discussing them with someone, knowing full well that whatever is on the other side is not someone that's going to help him. I hazard a guess that this is maybe Gary or another demon entirely based on the alternate ending. Now, John bearing his soul and repenting for his sins for failing to help Amy, as well as the various notes we have about John and his mental well-being, give us a clear indication that he is not someone who is in the best frame of mind when all of this is happening. And keep that in mind as we move on to what happens next. After a cute puzzle to avoid which very well may be the unspeakable demon, it's the next note we find that really shows that the cult is messing with John. Initially, the note comes across as another newspaper article where it discusses the 3 murder victims, presumably the 3 that we found in Gallup Cemetary earlier in the game. But as you go on, the note turns into something about John, where it states that John was the one that killed Amy, and to not mourn the loss of those people. And then the note starts to talk to John directly. It begins to attack him by stating that he is the one that killed those people by cutting off their heads. So again, it's changing the narrative of what may have happened to try and feed off of the guilt that John has for failing to help Amy in the first place. And speaking of Amy, with the newspaper article in quotation marks ending with "I'm here, John," in that familiar purple writing of Amy Martin's. Then it cuts to this, John in the middle of a cult ritual surrounded by cultists, as well as Amy Martin, still possessed as she was in the last chapter, at the head of it all. Then we see this, and I honestly don't quite know what to make of it, at least when I first played the game. But after reading and rereading and thinking some more, and at least as it stands, focusing on the first half of this chapter at least, there are too many contradictory bits of information to try and create some kind of cohesive timeline of events for this chapter, because at present it feels very much like the cult are either manipulating John's already damaged mind, as that newspaper writing showed. They were clearly telling John stuff that he didn't want to hear, that he was the one that killed Amy and that he killed those 3 people as we were making our way through the cemetery. So again, it goes back to how it feels very much like the cult are either manipulating John's already damaged mind, because as we know, John was in the psychiatric ward, and apparently at the same time as Amy Martin, according to one of the notes. So the cult are taking advantage of John's unstable mind and showing him things that they want him to see to mess with him, and they clearly want something from John, or they just enjoy watching him suffer, which may be another thing. It's either that, or this is a large sort of outcome based on the second part of this chapter, which we will go through thoroughly in the next video, which is that John himself is so wrapped with guilt over his failure to save Amy from the cult on that fateful night in September, is having nightmares about being initiated into the cult and becoming one of the things that he has sworn to stop. Either way, we will discuss all things John and the rest of chapter 2 in the next video. And I felt it best to break this up into 2 videos, as I think there are just too many things to explore in this chapter, such as the convoluted initiation ending, John's perception of reality, Sister Bell, and potentially what the church represents in this chapter, the Martin family, all of the demons, and just there's a lot still to go through. I really hope you enjoyed this one, and apologies it took so long from the last one. I'm trying to balance obviously my Let's Play videos with other more detailed video projects like the theory videos. It's just been a really busy time, sort of all things in my life at the minute. So thank you to everyone for watching this video and the previous one, including the developer Airdorf. So I really appreciate that. It's one of the best indie horror series I've played in a long time, and like all of you, I can't wait for chapter 3. Oh, and speaking of chapter 3, the trailer for Faith chapter 3 just dropped, and boy, does it look exciting. If not for anything else other than Father Garcia with a freaking shotgun. See you later.